Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a huge story, one that starts with the very first family and ends with a flood that literally reshaped the entire world. So, what exactly happened between Adam and the flood? Well, we're going to trace that epic saga of early humanity. It's a story packed with prophets, jealousy, corruption, and yeah, a world-altering flood that basically set the stage for, well, everything that came after. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, here's our roadmap. We'll start right after Adam, then we'll meet the prophets Seth and Idris. After that, we'll see how idolatry began with Noah, cover the Great Flood, and then wrap up with how humanity got its second start.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Our story kicks off right after Adam and Eve came down to Earth. You have to imagine, humanity was brand new, just figuring things out. But it didn't take long for things to go wrong. Humanity stumbled, and it stumbled hard, right into its first great tragedy.
And that tragedy, it was the very first murder on Earth. Cain killed his brother Abel, and it was all driven by jealousy over a woman he wanted to marry. Think about that. This one act, this single awful event, it basically set up the conflict that humanity has been dealing with ever since. That internal battle between doing what's right and chasing what you want.
So you could imagine the grief Adam and Eve felt. But in their loss, God gave them a gift, another son, a righteous son named Seth. And his name, Hibatullah, is so perfect because it literally means the gift of God. He was truly a divine gift, meant to help heal that terrible wound.
So, as time went on, Adam eventually passed away, and it was Seth who stepped up to take on his father's role. He became the second prophet, but he had a huge task ahead of him, leading a humanity that was, by this point, tragically split in two.
So what did he do? Well, Seth built this community of faith, and he had 50 divine scrolls of wisdom to guide them. He also gave his followers one really critical command. Look, we're up here in the mountains. You need to stay separate from Cain's descendants and all the corruption that's growing down there in the plains.
And just like that, you had a world split right down the middle. You had two completely different societies. Up in the mountains were the followers of Seth, the pious ones, and the sources say their men were known for being pretty handsome. Then, down in the plains, you had the descendants of Cain. Their society was all about pleasure, and their women were known for being beautiful and, well, not very modest. But you know how these things go. Eventually, that separation didn't hold. Curiosity, desire, it was just too much. Men from the mountains started venturing down into the plains, and they were, let's just say, captivated. The two groups began to mix, and pretty soon, passion completely overran piety. And that's when you see the first widespread societal level fall into sin. Okay, quick aside here, because this is really interesting. Where do all these specific details come from, like the handsome men and the beautiful women? Well, a lot of these vivid stories are from what's known in Islamic scholarship as Israeliyat, basically traditions from Judeo-Christian sources. And the guidance on how to handle them is pretty cool. You don't fully believe them, but you don't outright reject them either. There's sort of these fascinating stories that fill in the gaps, but you keep them at a bit of an intellectual arm's length. Just a cool piece of context. So, as you can imagine, this mixing just led to more and more corruption, and it started to spread everywhere. To confront this growing darkness, God sent another prophet, a man named Idris, who was a righteous descendant of Seth. And Idris, who you might also know as Enoch from other traditions, was an absolutely incredible figure. I mean, think about this guy. He was the first man to write with a pen, the first to study the stars, basically inventing astronomy. He was a tailor, and it said he praised God with every single stitch he made. But he wasn't just a scholar. Oh no, he was a man of action. He was the first prophet to actually organize an army and go to war against the forces of corruption. And for all of this, for his amazing piety and his rock-solid faith, the Quran says that God honored Idris by raising him to a high station. And the tradition on this is that it means he was literally raised into the heavens. I mean, what a unique and incredible honor for one of the very first prophets.
Okay, let's keep moving, because the story really escalates from here. For 10 centuries, 1,000 years, humanity had worshipped one God. But then, a new and even bigger spiritual crisis hit.
This was the Great Deviation, the worship of idols.
And how did this even happen? This slide breaks it down perfectly. It was a really subtle 4-step process. Step 1, it started with something good. People were mourning 5 really beloved pious men. Step 2, Satan slides in with a suggestion. Hey, why not make some statues to remember them, to inspire you? Step 3, a generation passes. People forget why the statues were built. They're just there. And then step 4, Satan comes back to the new generation and says, you know those statues? Your ancestors worshiped them as gods. And just like that, they started worshiping them too. It's an incredible look at how good intentions can get twisted. So, to fight back against this huge deviation, God sends the prophet Noah. And get this, for 950 years, just try to wrap your head around that number, 950 years, he preached, day in and day out, pleading with his people to stop worshiping idols and come back to the one true God. But after all that time, all those centuries of effort, he faced just immense opposition. The elite, the wealthy, the powerful, they just mocked him. Society as a whole ridiculed him. And then the truly heartbreaking part, he was rejected by the people closest to him. His own wife and even one of his own sons refused to believe his message. So after almost 1,000 years of this struggle, it got to a point where all hope seemed lost for his people. So Noah prayed. He prayed to God for deliverance, and the answer he got was a command. A command that wasn't just about saving the few who believed, but about changing the entire world forever.
The command? Build a giant ark on dry land. You can imagine the mockery he endured for that. But then the sign came, and it was a strange one. Water suddenly started erupting from a simple stone oven. And then the floodgates opened, literally. Water burst from the earth and poured from the sky. It was an absolute deluge. And in one final tragic scene, Noah's pleading with his disbelieving son to get on the ark, but his son refuses, and is just swept away.
Finally, the rain stopped. The churning waters began to recede, and the ark came to rest on Mount Judy. And when those survivors stepped out, they stepped into a world that had been totally washed clean. A quiet, empty world, ready for a brand new beginning.
And this is why Noah is often called the second father of humanity, which is incredible when you think about it. Yes, there were other believers on the ark, but the sources tell us their family lines eventually ended. So what does that mean? It means that every single person on earth today is said to be a descendant of just Noah and his 3 sons who were on that ark with him. That's amazing.
So who were these 3 sons? Their names were Sam, Ham, and Japheth. And as they spread out across this new, clean earth, tradition says they became the forefathers of the world's major civilizations. So from Sam, you get the Semitic peoples, think Arabs, Persians. From Ham, the peoples of Africa, like the Egyptians and Berbers. And from Japheth, you get the peoples from the north and east, like the Turks, the Slavs, and so on.
So when you step back and look at this whole story, everything from the very first murder born out of jealousy all the way to a global flood that wiped out idolatry, you start to see a theme. The real conflict here wasn't between nations or armies. It was a battle happening inside the human soul, a fight between our inner spiritual compass and our most raw, basic desires.
And that really leaves us with a powerful question for our own time, doesn't it? Because in a way, we've all inherited this story. So the question for us is, how do we, as individuals and as a whole society, navigate that exact same ancient choice? The choice between piety and desire.